Taipei vows to defend its democracy as Beijing sends fighter jets into its air defense zone. Taiwan warns cross-strait relations have hit their lowest point in decades. Could the two soon be facing a military confrontation? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Taiwan and China's escalating standoff. Well, it's 265 times smaller than China and officially recognized by just 15 states. But Taiwan doesn't appear to be backing down from a fight with Beijing. While President Tsai Ing-wen has said her country is not seeking a military confrontation, Taipei will do whatever it takes to defend itself. The island is on high alert after Chinese military jets entered its air defense zone, and Taiwan's defense minister warns Beijing could be just a few years away from mounting a full-scale invasion.
Speaking about invading Taiwan, China does currently possess such capabilities, but we must consider the consequences. We don't want to take any provocative actions, because if we irritate them, it's like irritating a person who'd employ everything at hand when irritated. So following our judgments, the year 2025 is the year they will have more comprehensive capabilities.
Well, for almost 80 years, Taiwan has considered itself a sovereign nation. It has its own constitution, elected leaders, and a pretty powerful military, with almost 300,000 troops. Beijing, on the other hand, considers Taiwan a breakaway province, and President Xi Jinping has promised to reclaim it, even if by force. Here he is speaking in 2019.
我们不承诺放弃使用武力。
We make no promise to give up the use of military force and reserve the option of taking all necessary means targeting outside forces and a small number of Taiwan independent separatists and their activities, but not Taiwan compatriots.
So military confrontation between Taiwan and China could become a possibility, and standing in the middle right now, trying to ensure that doesn't happen, is the United States. U.S. President Joe Biden has had a difficult relationship with Beijing since taking office, and for the first time in 7 months, he called his Chinese counterpart to try to ease tensions between Beijing and Taipei. This is what came out of that phone call.
Well, I've spoken with Xi about Taiwan. We agree, we'll abide by the Taiwan agreement. That's where we are. And we made it clear that I don't think he should be doing anything other than abiding by the agreement.
Well, there's some confusion about exactly what Taiwan agreement Biden was referring to, but nevertheless, it seems he's happy to maintain the status quo. But does China want the same? Right now, Washington doesn't officially recognize Taiwan as per Beijing's one China policy, but a U.S. law dating back to 1979 pledges to assist in Taipei's self-defense, mostly via military hardware. In fact, billions of dollars in annual defense contracts are part of the Taiwan Relations Act. So how serious is Beijing about taking Taiwan back? And if China attacks, would the U.S. come to Taipei's aid? To debate that, I'm joined from Beijing by China Affairs analyst Einar Tangen. J. Michael Cole joins us from Taipei. He's the author of Insidious Power: How China Undermines Global Democracy, and a senior fellow at the Global Taiwan Institute. And also in Taipei is Asia political risk analyst and former chairperson of Republicans Abroad Asia, Ross Feingold. Thanks all so much for being with me. I want to begin with this last transgression, if I can call it that. China flying almost 150 fighter jets into what Taiwan has declared its air defense zone. J. Michael Cole, is this just Chinese posturing ahead of Taiwan's National Day, or could it be a practice run for something bigger?
Well, it can be several things. For one, that's certainly part of Chinese signaling to Taiwan, to the international community, at a time when we're seeing greater involvement by United States and like-minded partners in the region, military exercises in the Philippine Sea and all that. But oftentimes these transits in Taiwan's air defense identification zone are timed to coincide with some developments within the international community that have some Taiwan angle. For example, last week Taiwan declared that it was officially seeking to join the CPTPP. Beijing regarded this as an attempt by Taipei to move towards independence. So these exercises are aimed at sending signals, at an attempt to condition Taiwan in the international community. But we also need to keep in mind that these are also opportunities for Chinese pilots to train themselves, operations at sea. We've seen exercises in nighttime as well, which is relatively new for China. So it's a combination of different things, not all of which is necessarily aimed at Taiwan.
Okay. Overall, though, I have to say you don't sound necessarily alarmed by this.
Well, we've been seeing this for about 18 months now. They started escalating with those types of transits following President Tsai Ing-wen's re-election in January 2020. So people here have grown accustomed to these operations by the Chinese. I would emphasize that while alarming, they still take place in international waters. This is not Taiwan's airspace, as oftentimes is misrepresented in some media. But people are taking note. But again, as long as the Chinese limit themselves to operations in international waters, we'll pay close attention. But we're certainly not. This is certainly not war yet.
Okay, fair enough. Ross, let me turn to you. Joe Biden, seems to want to just maintain the status quo. But is there a risk in that he is actually just kicking the can down the road? Ultimately giving China more time to strengthen any offensive it might be planning.
Well, President Biden was kind of known for taking that view on Taiwan-China relations during his time as a senator, as well as the 8 years he served as vice president. He certainly wasn't known as a supporter of Taiwan's formal separation from China. But it also gives a chance for the United States to see how Taiwan reacts to this. And Taiwan could react by saying we're accustomed to this and not really taking any action. Or Taiwan could react by taking appropriate measures to fortify its own defenses. I've been speaking with people in Washington, D.C. over the past few days, and there's some frustration, actually, with the Taiwan side, where we see press releases and tweets by government officials in Taiwan, but the substantive response that one would expect from a government facing this threat could still be improved.
Okay, Einar, let me get your thoughts, at least from China's perspective.
Well, I just wanted to make one comment on Ross's idea. I don't think bombs and bullets have been very effective in forcing any kind of change. I just want to make one thing clear. I appreciate the clarification on the air defense identification zone. Actually, Taiwan claims an air defense identification zone that includes parts of three Chinese provinces, one of which is not even on the coast, and the entire Taiwan Straits. So yeah, as he says, it's a little bit misleading when the press says, it sounds like, there are bombers and aircraft right over Taipei, when in fact this is game. Now, realize that China does not recognize that air defense identification zone, and they've disputed it much the way that the U.S. says that they have the right to sail ships, every month or so, or a little bit more than a month, up and down the Taiwan Straits. So at this point, I don't agree that it isn't. I think it is a little bit of alarming.
Okay.
You've seen a step towards much more, serious situations.
I know, just quickly, though, I mean, what most stood out to me in the initial headline wasn't about this, running into Taiwan's air defense zone. What it says is it's air defense zone, but that's not internationally recognized. It was more the record number, almost 150 jets. Why so many?
Well, I think that's connected in part to the National Day. I mean, China is also sending a message domestically that it is not giving up on Taiwan. Taiwan, as part of China, is in their constitution. It's not something that could be negotiated, and they fear that the trade war that's what started off as a tariff and trade war in Washington has now bled over into the financial area, And there's real concerns about if this would become a physical conflict. I mean, they look at the enhanced connections, the visits by high-ranking officials going both ways, the reception of Tsai Ing-wen in the U.S. They see this as a direct affront to what they have said is the status quo, which is a one China policy, which Biden affirmed yesterday. So it's puzzling. China is trying to figure out exactly what Washington's posture is, and it seems that Washington wants to keep them guessing.
J. Michael Cole, let me ask you, being in Taiwan, knowing the Taiwanese people, where do the Taiwanese people actually stand? I mean, most polls say the majority support an independent Taiwan, but is there a strong pro-Beijing contingent as well, perhaps similar to Hong Kong?
There is a pro-Beijing contingent in Taiwan. It is very small, tends to be among the elderly population as well. Support for unification right now stands in the very low single digits in Taiwan. There are a handful of political parties that are registered legally in Taiwan that also advocate for unification with China. However, you look at the results in local and nationwide elections, and they are performing extremely poorly. So the great majority of Taiwanese are in support of the status quo, which for all intents and purposes means that they already agreed that they are a sovereign state. Some of them call it Taiwan. Others use the official designation of Republic of China. But I think it's also very important to point out that there is a large segment of Taiwanese society that wants a Taiwanese state. And there is also, a similarly large segment that tends to vote for the opposition KMT that is very much attached to the Republic of China. So that's why there are, I would say there are two types of independence in Taiwan. There's what we call Taidu, which is a Taiwanese independence movement. And there's the Huadu, which are those who identify with the Republic of China and thereby define themselves by what they are not, and that is being part of the People's Republic of China.
Right. It's interesting, Ross, if you can pick up on that, because you're also in Taiwan and you know the state very well. I mean, how united would the Taiwanese be if China were to, launch an incursion of sorts or actually launch an offensive entirely to try to take Taiwan back by force? Would the Taiwanese people rally as one to fight China?
It's very much an unknown. There's a long list of shortcomings in Taiwan's defense establishment. The military service is not mandatory other than a brief period of training. The reserve system on which the military relies on in the event of hostilities is generally considered deficient, although the government has made moves to improve that. And some of the weapon systems that the government has recently agreed to purchase from the United States or to build indigenously are going to take several years until their arrival, during which time China is going to continue to invest in its own military capabilities. So we definitely have a mismatch between actions that the government takes here, which in the eyes of other countries are very normal actions, but in the eyes of China go down the road towards independence. But the military capability doesn't exist to match the potential risk, as I was mentioning earlier. And again, I think this is an area that deserves greater concern from the United States, rather than just giving the government in Taiwan its affirmation with rhetoric. And that's what we've seen in the past few days. We see statements from the U.S. saying, our support for Taiwan is rock solid. Unfortunately, there's just too much of this kind of cliche speak when it comes to U.S.-Taiwan relations, calling it a vibrant democracy and things like that, things we know already. But it's also the case that Taiwan does need to do more to invest in its own defense.
Taiwan might need to do more, but Ross, you have before characterized U.S. policy as strategic ambiguity that should probably move towards strategic clarity. When might the U.S. arguably be forced to take a stronger, clearer position on Taiwan?
Well, certainly that's been the policy of the United States when it comes to the question of, will the United States provide military assistance to Taiwan in the event of hostilities. And we usually call it strategic ambiguity. It's just unknown under what circumstances, if any, the United States would provide military assistance. A lot of experts and politicians in the United States have said the U.S. should change this to strategic clarity. But given President Biden's long history of involvement in foreign relations, both as a senator and as a vice president, he's going to be very reluctant to do that. If a Republican is elected in 2024, whether it's Donald Trump or a different Republican, there's a greater likelihood that United States policy on that point might change. But again, we still have to emphasize that it might change. We just don't know if it will.
Okay. I want to come back to that, but first let me return to Einar, because we talked about, the position of the Taiwanese public as well as, in part, the U.S. public. This is the question people sometimes ask about the Chinese public, and that is, why can't China let this go? Why does Beijing insist on taking control, of a people that has voted against them and actually just lived independently now for decades, really, since 1945?
Well, I mean, you have to remember there's a long history here, and for China, there's 100 years of humiliation when large parts of its country was taken by colonial forces, including the United States, Great Britain, France, etc. So they see this as restoring their homeland. I think that is a legitimate purposes. I think you see that all around the world. This idea that Taiwan has a path towards independence, it does not fly in Beijing, and it won't. And despite everything that Ross is saying about a military solution or something like that, it's nonsense. No one in any reputable military believes that there's a scenario where China could not overwhelm Taiwan. The wish on all sides is to have a peaceful reunification. But Taiwan's military posture has changed, despite what Ross says. They now have 2 missiles, one a cruise, one a ballistic, that can reach Beijing. And this is not what I would call a defensive measure. Remember, the 6 assurances back in 1982 were, in essence, saying that the U.S. would not engage in trying to increase to an attack ability Taiwan's what was only supposed to be a defense system. They were going to supply parts for existing systems and let them do that. But that has changed over the years. So saying that China should just let it go is kind of saying that Spain should let Catalan go. Everywhere you can have countries just kind of dissolving because people feel one way or another at a time. And unfortunately, that is not the case.
Okay. Let me ask. Let me ask J. Michael Cole if you think that's fair.
Well, I'm sensing a bit of a false moral equivalence here by emphasizing the fact that Taiwan has been developing missiles that can reach China proper. I mean, this is what is known as counterforce. It is still defensive, but it's a means by which Taiwan can hit targets, military targets in China, in case it were attacked by the Chinese. And we should also bear in mind that U.S. decisions on the provision of defense articles to Taiwan they're not rigid. They're flexible. They need to be adapted to shifting realities. And there is absolutely no question that over the past 2 or 3 decades, the Chinese have done everything in their power through their own acquisitions from countries like Russia, for example, to develop a altogether offensive capability that is meant, among other scenarios, to launch an assault against Taiwan. So if Taiwan does not react both asymmetrically, but also by perhaps emphasizing a little bit more the offensive capabilities, it would be subjecting itself to even higher possibility that the Chinese would succeed militarily. But it's, again, I need to emphasize that the Taiwanese, notwithstanding the fact that they are acquiring these weapons, will never be the ones to initiate armed conflict in the Taiwan Strait, and they are not threatening China with these types of weapons.
Go ahead, Einar.
Well, I don't know if they're threatening the fact that they're there and they have been developed. There is, obviously the AUKUS and the U.S. providing nuclear-powered submarines to, Australia. The question starts to arise: would they do this to Japan, and then would Taiwan be next? You're starting to see a pattern of, escalation that could well be nuclear. You might want to say that every nation is entitled to it, but I think we all know where that would end, and it would not be pretty.
Okay. If I can come back to Ross quickly, I mean, I've actually heard this analysis, and it's quite troublesome because some are saying that China has really become so powerful that it is able to care less and less about whatever position the United States takes and whatever threats it might make, threats that China perceives to actually protect Taiwan. I've even heard we could be getting to the point where almost as the Taliban got to, I don't mean that to sound extreme, but almost as the Taliban got to in negotiations with the United States, where in the end they were just kind of able to take everything because the United States just had no real power to stand up to fight for a country that it no longer wanted to fight for. Is that going too far, or is there a serious concern that people should have that China is progressively gaining so much ground and so much power that eventually they won't have to really care what the strategic position of the United States is?
Well, where your analysis is accurate is that the experts have gotten so many things wrong about China in recent decades. And when it comes to Taiwan issues specifically, one thing we hear is, well, China will be concerned about the reaction from Western countries, trade sanctions, or China will be concerned about the domestic response. And so thus they won't take action against Taiwan. I mean, in my own interactions with people in China who look at this issue, they're very supportive of their government's actions on Taiwan. And it's not a surprise that they are. They love their country, and a lot of them love their government, and they're going to support taking this action. So whether it's here in Taiwan, where I think there's a lot of underestimating of what China is willing to do, or it's the United States, again, I think these other countries need to be extraordinarily careful about underestimating what China is willing to do.
J. Michael Cole,
well,
go ahead, Einar.
When's the last time that China started a war, an armed conflict, or walked away from, an Afghanistan situation? The Middle East is a mess. Ross, I mean, you're disingenuous. And the line of questioning is odd, given that it's been the U.S. who has made a mess of things up and around the world. I mean, you really have not seen anywhere where the U.S. has been successfully able, by imposition of bombs and bullets, to put in what they think is the only way in which countries can be run.
Einar, as you ask, when's the last time China started a war? It has to be asked, when is the last time China had the biggest military on the planet?
Yeah, you can say that, but what you have to look at people's actions. You can't anticipate that China is going to react the same way that the United States and Europe acted in the past. If you're going to do that, then you can impugn all sorts of negative attitudes on China, but you don't have any substance to do so.
Okay, J. Michael Cole, I want to get your thoughts on that, and also the allusion there to the EU. I'm wondering where they would stand on any further escalation here, and do they factor into the equation, the European Union?
Well, to your first question, I mean, China simply did not have the capabilities to engage in the kind of activities that countries like the United States have over several decades. But given the nature of the regime and the ideology, the rather extremist ideology that we have seen, particularly under Xi Jinping, we could be forgiven, those of us who live in Taiwan, to be a little bit apprehensive about future decisions by Beijing when it comes to use of force. I completely agree as well that we should not take for granted what we regard from the outside as rational decision-making in Beijing. Their calculations might be quite different. The ultra-nationalism that has been cultivated in China since 2012 or so under Xi Jinping again creates its own drivers and incentives for the government to act in a more belligerent fashion. So if at some point the regime, the government in Beijing concludes that Taiwan is slipping away, because their whole strategy of peaceful unification with Taiwan has been a complete failure, in my opinion, then there is a possibility, if the reputation and the future of the CCP appears to be under threat because of their failure to reintegrate Taiwan, that could certainly create pressures for the government to take more drastic action. As to the EU, well, they're certainly distant from Taiwan. Most countries do not have the capabilities to play a major role in the Indo-Pacific or the Taiwan Strait. But more and more, these countries are also awakening to the reality of dealing with a extremely assertive China, or more powerful China, and the impact that this has been having on their own democracies and institutions. With that comes a realization as well that Taiwan, as a democratic frontline state, has certain things that it can bring to the table for those countries, if only knowledge about what is going on in China. And certainly given the role that Taiwan plays in the global supply chain, particularly semiconductors, there is great and growing interest among EU countries to make sure that there is no declaration of war and hostilities in the Taiwan Strait. So that certainly gives them, or at least an interest in contributing to deterrence against a potential Chinese attack against Taiwan.
And that will have to be the final word. J. Michael Cole, Einar Tangen, Ross Feingold, thank you all so much for being with us on the Newsmakers. Fascinating discussion. And to our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter at @D_Newsmakers, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.